this is update for December 16, 2022, day 296 of the war, end of the date update. So today I'm gonna, as always, gonna start with the strategic topics, then gonna discuss Russian attack against Ukrainian power grid, which was very big, significant, and inflicted a lot of damage. And then we're gonna do walks through the front line as always. So actually, let's start with some of the sort of reference information about the help that Ukraine military is getting. I'm gonna focus just on the 155 millimeter shells because that's really sort of the main tool of the war. Let's put it this way. There was just recently numbers announced that Ukraine is going to get 5,000 155 millimeter shells from Germany and 80,000 from the US. So as you can see, this is 85,000. That's if you remember, I was mentioning that Ukraine in the most intense time was using about between 10 to 15,000. Let's say it's not intense. Let's say it's right now 5,000. So as you can imagine, it's not even months worth of the artillery shells. So there's a very clear shortage of what is sort of needed in Ukraine right now. Then a little bit about Russian military effort. As if you remember, it was a while ago, I think summer, sometime like in May, June time frame, I was discussing some of the Russian military facilities, and the main ones are near Yekaterinburg. It's a Ural Mountains, and there are tank factories and so on there. So there are in some of the Russian news is mentioned that they switched to 6-day work week to produce obviously more equipment, and on top of that, they are considering switching to 12-hour work days. Now let's switch to sort of Russian, a little bit sort of consumer economy. So due to the sort of decrease in economic activity, many foreign companies left Russia. So right now, Russian office space has 24% vacancies. So basically, 1/4 or quarter of all office buildings are unoccupied in Russia. Then let's switch to Russian consumer. And Russian car dealers announced that they have only 20 to 30,000 cars left in inventory, and by that I mean foreign cars, not Chinese, not Russian made, because as you can imagine, that's not what Russian consumers want. And that's roughly 1 month of inventory. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next. I would not be surprised that Russia finds a way to import through United Arab Emirates, which has a large, sort of like a, large market where it's kind of gray market where you probably can get something from there. In any case, it's going to be more expensive and more difficult for Russia, which will reduce the demand for those cars further, and it will make overall, as a whole, population poorer. Then again, Russia, this time Russian crude, Urals, which is the main one. It's about like 60% of Russian crude production. So it's been selling for the past months on average at $57 per barrel. So this is still fine price for Russian. It's not a problem. Mentioned before many times that the cash cost to extract, or this specifically Urals, is about $10 to $12. So as you can, from a cash perspective, it's still hugely profitable. It's definitely not a problem. Russia will continue sort of selling, even at the lower price, it's still going to be profitable. For the same time, Brent was at roughly $84, so that's about 32% discount. Typically, Urals trades more or less in line with Brent. Then now let's switch to little bit to European situation energy-wise. There's problem brewing there. So there's cold weather, I think past like 3-4 days in Europe or a little bit longer, and as a result, a lot of natural gas is being drawn from the storages, and very quickly the amount of natural gas in storages went down to 85% of the storage capacity. Before sort of the season, it was like in high 90s. I don't remember by 96, 97 or 98, but so as you can see, in a matter of like 15 days, where actually probably 3-4 days, the storage went down by roughly 10%. That's just obviously not a good sign. That probably means that price for natural gas will remain high in Europe, and this whole energy crunch, energy disaster will continue in Europe, and the inflation is not gonna decrease meaningfully, especially in Europe. Then now let's switch to the U.S. and energy. U.S. Department of Energy announced that they're going to start buying crude oil for its strategic petroleum reserve. If you remember, I mentioned this many times before that the SPR stands at extremely low levels, similar the lowest since I think June of 1984, January 1984, and it's less than half of its capacity essentially. So what this means that it definitely will put the sort of floor on the price for crude oil. Probably somewhat good timing. However, let's see what happens towards the end of the winter. And also, if you remember, in February when Europe will stop completely buying crude oil from Russia, and especially not even crude oil, but processed products such as diesel fuel and also probably US buying gasoline. So definitely not going to help crude oil prices to go down overall, basically. So very likely that we're seeing right now essentially bottom in crude oil prices, gasoline prices, and diesel fuel prices. Unless obviously we have some kind of depression, which is obvious, it's on the table. So that's not with what central banks are doing. They're essentially trying to generate something along those lines in the world. And just to prove that, Goldman Sachs, which is the most shrewdest investment bank out there, it's almost, I would say, if you are offer a deal by Goldman Sachs, just run away. Just know you probably being sort of taking advantage even the way you don't even know how. So it's laying off roughly 10% of its workforce, which is 4,000 people laid off already. So as you can imagine, the most shrewdest investment bank for sure knows what they're doing, and this is probably just the first round of layoffs there. And it's the number is sheer number 10% without even sort of thinking much, very quick. This is probably the future where everything starts to go, because there were layoffs in the tech sector, but it's very clearly it's spreading into other sectors, and nobody will be sort of immune. And I want to also highlight that this layoffs will hit mostly white collar jobs. Actually, blue collar are probably still going to be in demand. There will be still probably not enough supply of people who want to do the blue collar job, and there is very logical reason. They're not paying living wages. So it's not because somehow some mystery, because that's what I see on in the West, like, okay, just nobody wants to take these jobs. What's wrong? I know just people don't want to work. Usually, it's just typically turns into blaming people. The reality is, people are very intelligent on a whole, or at least in this matters, I would say, and simply these jobs are not paying living wages, and that's what's really what's going on. And what is going to be happening is that this blue collar jobs will eventually sort of reclaim their share of the sort of value add that's being created at the expense of the white collar jobs. And that will create will balance this distorted labor market that's been happening probably for past 20-30 years in the West, and in Ukraine in particular as well, and probably around the world in general. So this is going to be one big huge realignment, and this also means that inflation is not going to go down because blue collar, it's who does the actual work, and that really means that it's a significant component in the cost of every company. So they won't be able to sort of easily trim the expenses, and on per unit, the costs of the whatever services or products will still remain elevated, even with all of this sort of central bank tightening and layoffs and everything worsening economic climate. There's still going to be need for this blue collar jobs. Now let's touch a little bit Chinese influence. I mentioned as a day, I think 2 days ago, 1 day ago, that essentially Huawei supplying pretty much all of the 4G, 5G network equipment for the 5G and 4G networks in Persian Gulf, so like Saudi Arabia, UAE, all of those countries. So there's also statistics for Europe, and particularly for Germany. There, 59% of 5G network relies on Huawei equipment, and 57% of 4G network. So as you can imagine, like the influence of Chinese sort of tech is tremendous in Europe, much stronger than in US, where essentially Huawei doesn't, almost like non-existent. So that's again leverage by the Chinese authorities that they have against Europe. Now let's switch to situation in Ukraine. I'm going to discuss obviously this new attack against Ukrainian power grid. So this was pretty major, I would say well-planned attack that reached its goals in many instances. So inflicted a very heavy damage in many places. There were attacks in Kyiv, then in Korostin, because the reason the substation there was attacked because it's actually allows to feed Kyiv from the nuclear power plant, one here, Rivne, and also Khmelnytsky power plant here in north. So essentially was feeding Kyiv, and this was damaged. So the Kyiv is essentially the subways completely stopped. Probably at this point, more or less, that it's probably not going to renew its service for the foreseeable future, because it's a huge user of electricity, and there's just simply not enough transmission capacity to provide that level of electricity. Even the subway totally shut down. There's still not enough electricity, so I don't know what percentage of the city is without electricity, but probably at least 40%, 50% of the city. Then many places without water, without heat. Right now it's fairly, it's not warm, let's put this way. So the situation is extremely critical. Where it goes, nobody knows, but it's becoming more and more clear with every passing day that the city is essentially that. And basically this was also very carefully planned, this attack by Russian side to basically cut off power from the capital, from Kyiv, which they almost there, and they essentially reached that goal. So this is just, I would say, agony. What's going on with Kyiv, essentially, it's a dead city at this point. Then there were also heavy attacks in Kharkiv. similar results. Many places were hit. The difference in Kharkiv case that the Russian side also attacked power generating facilities as well. Actually, in Kyiv, they attacked as well power generating facilities. So essentially, both cities are in equally terrible situation. Then there were blackout. There are sort of rolling, like uncontrolled rolling blackouts throughout the country right now. Then also the Poltava region completely lost power. Sumy region, significant portion of Chernihiv, Cherkasy. So essentially here, Kropivnitsky. Also Dnipro is the same in the same boat. Also, subway lost was stopped to sort of preserve energy. The one dangerous development, there is a dam here in Zaporizhya, and it actually was attacked. Like literally, the rocket hit the dam. I would say it can withstand a lot of damage because it's obviously built with expectation that it can be attacked. But if this continues, this could be really a huge problem because there's huge amount of water that will simply go down. And as you can imagine, this Zaporizhya nuclear power plant down here, so it might get flooded. Like it could be really uncontrollable, total disaster. Let's put this way, with nuclear sort of waste, new radiation, and all of the sort of typical things. So anyway, so the center and east of the country was essentially, lost power in totally uncontrollable situation. The West is faring a little bit better. Fewer attacks, almost no attacks here. There was only, I think, one attack in Ternopil, around Ternopil against the substation, and I think a couple attacks, one in Khmelnytsky region and Vinnytsia. But essentially, this what's happening is effectively that this part of the country is being sort of separated from the sort of this kind of like most western part of the country at this point, which is what I said before, that first, before everything collapses, it will split into islands, and then this one big island will be split into sort of smaller island eventually. But it's very clear that Russian leadership decided to destroy Ukrainian power distribution network and create huge problems inside of the country and pressure in that way, in a hope that it will force peace negotiation and essentially surrender of Ukraine and territorial concessions to Russia. Don't think it's going to happen. It's going to be very it's already super difficult, horrific situation for most people. Unfortunately, Ukrainian leadership is completely not helpful, not doing what it should and can do in this moment. But unfortunately, that's just sad reality of what's going on in Ukraine. Anyways, so the system is one step closer to complete collapse, deeper in coma. One sort of on the positive side, so there are some news that Azerbaijan, which is a country that's neighboring Iran, Russia, and Georgia in Caucasus mountains, that they sent, don't remember how many, 20 or 30 transformers to Ukraine that apparently helped to little bit rebuild the network, put it in a little bit better shape. Doesn't mean that it solved anything, not at all by any means, but it helped. I think the best way to say it helped to a little bit stabilize the power grid from sort of imminent collapse. So with this attacks remains to be seen. It might be again on the track of basically collapsing under its own weight because there is so many disbalances in the system at this point. So we'll see in the next several days what's going to happen. Maybe there are more transformers coming, so This is basically like kind of like you on Titanic and you're trying to pump out the water that's coming into the hull of the ship, and in some ways it's unfortunately a futile attempt. So now let's switch to the front line. We're going to do it in a clockwise fashion, as we always do, starting from very north. Despite these attacks, the situation along the state border is still relatively stable and relatively quiet, without much action. Now let's jump to North Lugansk front line. So here things are, very similar. Russian attacks, Ukrainian, I guess at this point, counterattack here, where you can see near Yakovlivka, but essentially status quo remains and no essential changes on this front line. Now let's jump to the North Donbass, which is the most difficult for Ukrainian side. To prove that, so it looks like Ukrainian forces lost control of Yakovlivka. Here, Wagner mercenaries managed to take control of it. So as you can see, right now Soledar is becoming outflanked, not in a sort of not to the point that Ukrainian troops needs to withdraw, but essentially more or less it looks like it's going to be lost relatively soon. Not to mention this whole area around Bilogorivka, Vesela, which is essentially in the same boat. So if, let's say, what's the most logical sort of outcome of this is that Ukrainian command will be forced one way or another, whether forced or do it on its own, but basically straight in the front line, starting from this Vimka and then going a little bit west of Yakovlivka and then west of of this Paraskovivka, which also means that Soledar will be lost. So at this point, the front line here is, I would say, irreparably broken by the Russian side, and this forces the hand of Ukrainian side at this point here. Now let's move a little bit south. Russian attacks east of Bahmut, but here it just there is no true idea of capturing Bahmut or getting through here. It's just putting pressure so the Ukrainian command doesn't bring reinforcements to other threatened front lines. And then south of Bahmut, it was there were attacks, but they were sort of relatively, I'll call it like less furious and fewer in number. Doesn't mean anything. This is probably just regrouping by Wagner mercenaries, planning next round of attacks. But here the front line is also largely broken and sort of similar, maybe not as bad situation right now as near Soledar, but it's essentially it's in bad situation. Let's put it this way. So overall, situation here is the worst for Ukrainian side, and slowly but surely. Ukraine is on the path to lose both Soledar and Bahmut. Soledar probably will be first, and then next one will be obviously Bahmut. Not gonna happen, in next week, unless obviously something unexpected happens. But there were some rumors that Russia was planning to capture Bahmut by New Year. I would say probably not quite New Year, but I wouldn't say that that's totally unrealistic goal. That's how I describe the situation here. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on the central Donbass front line. Things here are somewhat quieter. So attacks a little bit north of Marinka. Russian side is trying to develop initial successes that they had there. I mentioned that they control the road between Marinka and Krasnohorivka, so they continue hammering in this weak space in the hope to create a breach here. And then they again attack Novomikhailivka, which were totally not successful here. So this looks a little bit more promising than it used to be, where it was completely also like a complete concrete for the Russian side. But now they started to develop sort of cracks in Ukrainian defenses here. It's still in relatively good shape, but it's not the situation in North Donbass, but it's also sort of negative trend for Ukrainian side. So as you can see now here, there are like this salient, like north of Avdiivka, call it Novobahmutivka salient, then this Piski salient that is sort of deeper than it looks, which start to outlying Avdiivka, and then next one probably will be another salient Marinka, which if Russian troops move more further here, this will essentially force withdrawal from Novomikhailivka, which is pretty good stronghold so far for Ukrainian side. So overall, as you can see, essentially Ukrainian troops are on defensive and lost initiative very clearly in North Donbass and Central Donbass. In North Lugansk, it's sort of kind of like 50-50 between those two sides, but sort of clearly moving into the Russian favor. And now let's check the Zaporizhya front line, which is quiet here. So here simply just quiet. So overall, as a whole assessment, is that Ukrainian Ukrainian troops are one step closer to completely losing initiative, if not even say that they already lost it at this point. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.